This episode is brought to you by EFG Hermes One, your one app for investing in more than 35 stock markets worldwide. Hello again, I'm Malak Fuad, and welcome to What I Did Next from A&T Media. We're halfway through the year, so this week, my producer Chirag and I decided that it would be a great idea to do a check-in and recap the first 6 months of the year. We discuss the inspiring stories and conversations that guests have shared with us on the show so far in 2025, and we look ahead to the schedule and lineup.
Well, first of all, welcome to what used to be called our wrap up, but I guess we have to come up with a new name for this now, which is more like a check-in.
That's right. Well, it's also we're halfway through our continuous year, which is a new thing for us. So, I guess this is our half-year check-in.
That sounds like a little too serious, perhaps, for what this is meant to be.
Maybe.
But yeah, it's like let's look at the KPIs. But no, I think actually I wanted to start there, which is like I wanted to get maybe some first thoughts because we have changed our schedule quite a bit. We're kind of this ongoing cycle. Maybe you can share some initial thoughts of how it's going, how you're feeling about it.
Yeah. So for me, it feels like a very natural progression almost. It's almost as if I mean I haven't felt that it's any harder or in terms of it's taking up more of our time. I think we're doing more content because
Mhm.
although we have one new guest every month, we have a lot more content every month around that guest. So whether it's our encore series that is added into that month, whether it's events from outside that we are sharing with the show's listeners, or whether it's other kinds of content that we're producing. So it is more work, but I'm not feeling it. I'm not finding it overwhelming at all. I find that it seems like a natural fit for the show, actually. I think after being around for 5 years now, actually, um, having that extra content, being able to share our own voice and more around the sort of the ethos of the show and not only hear from guests, I think is actually quite nice. And I think listeners are appreciating that. I think we're getting feedback from some listeners that they're enjoying that. Certainly the social media reaction seems to be that when we're providing content related to events or other kinds of content, it certainly seems to be very popular. So I think it's a nice balance between the guests and between our extra initiatives.
We talked about this, I think, at the end of last year, as it being a natural evolution for the show, and sort of giving it a little bit of new direction, and just also infusing it with some freshness. I think it's also it's been really nice to do these encores as well, right? So you're going back and checking in with a number of alumni guests. We're going to keep doing more of those. We just started that. I think it's nice because we have certain guests who have. And a lot of the ones that we did encore with are like season one, season just like a first year of the show. So one is they haven't potentially answered some questions that we're doing now. Like the lightning round is a good example where like we're getting to kind of just check in with them. But it's also, like you said, giving us space to talk to them about stuff that's maybe not very much in the box of just their journey, right? So it can be things like interesting projects they're working on. You're starting all of these episodes with like, what have you done since the last time we spoke?
It was always meant to be a really fun, light segment. We've done the heavy lifting the first time round in the main interviews, where we did the in depth and we did the backgrounds and so on. And this was really like fun and light, and they've all come to the table with a very different attitude. Actually, they've come to the table feeling light and airy too, because they've been there, done that, especially with me. So, they're not, I think if anyone's being interviewed, regardless of how much of a pro you are, there's always a bit of anticipation. There's always a bit of anxiety. You're never really sure how the interview is going to work.
And it's a certain kind of headspace, like you said, right? Like you're being reflective and you're trying to, think about where you've been and where
Exactly.
you are today and all of that. Yeah.
And when you're invited back onto a show, I think as well, they know what to expect. They've had good experiences with us in the past, so they come to the table so much more relaxed, ready to have a bit of fun. The lightning round is always really popular, and they really throw themselves into it, and they like really relish it. I mean, I think of Omar Samra, for example. He just dove into that, and he had so much fun with it. And I saw him after that encore episode was recorded and aired. I saw him at the Narrative Summit in Suma Bay, which is where he lives. And, he's just having fun with it. And you can tell, he got into it. So it's nice. Are you ready? Get set, go. Crowds or solitary?
Solitary.
Mountains or ocean?
Mountains.
Favorite activity?
Writing.
What's your least favorite activity?
Ooh, washing dishes.
Okay.
The question I think that surprised me a little bit to a degree is you always ask them, like, if you weren't doing this, what else would you be doing? And in some cases, you're asking them that just independent of the lightning round as well. And I'm not typically one that thinks of it from a regret point of view. It's like I wish I had done something else. But it's interesting that there are all these like hopping off points. I mean, we have people who either studied something and wonder if that would have been a career, but a lot of them have career interests that are very sort of intersection with the kind of work they're doing. So you have ad making and thinking of like anthropology, right? Like and just human behavior. So there are interesting corollary careers that are never really thought about it, or it feels almost like it's coming from a point of like, what if I had done something else? But it's
Yeah.
not that, right? It's just this like, this is another career I would have flourished in because I have a very similar feel for that area.
I think most of us have, interests that correspond a little bit to where we end up career-wise, but other people haven't. So, for example, someone was saying, I forget who it was, but someone was saying that they'd like to be a lawyer. They would have liked to be a lawyer,
It was Fatin, I think.
and
Both
I
wanted to be
said I
lawyers.
would have liked to be a lawyer too. And so, and I'm not even. I mean, it's never. It's not something that I ever studied but it would have been my alternate career if I was beginning again.
An interesting one, by the way, is like I not only I was almost on the path to become a lawyer, which is just
You
funny
were.
to me when I hear, yeah, me,
Oh
yeah.
yeah.
It was an accidental discovery because I had to take a business law course and I just did really well. And it was one
Yeah.
of those things where like, then me and the professor were having all these conversations on the side and he was like, dude, you should you should explore this. And I'm like, never even thought of it. Like I had not really thought about it until I'm like, well, okay, there's something about the analytical like understanding of what's happening that works with me.
I'm a bit put off by the denseness of it, though. The going down deep into all the weeds of it. But I think, maybe I would have done it. But I know that going back to our original question, you end up in a certain career, but I think people's interests for an alternate career, as you said, are probably not very far from where they are. If you had to choose another profession, what would it be?
Zoologist, archaeologist, chef.
Okay. Zoologist, well, your new movie is obviously with animals.
Yeah.
And archaeologist, why?
Like the pursuit of knowing all of these structures around the world. Why are they there? And that's really where I want to...
Is there a history interest there? Or
I am absolutely fascinated by the pyramids around the world and obviously ours.
Yeah.
And I'd love to know why they existed.
One of the we've actually talked about this for maybe a couple of years, this idea of almost taking what I did next offline as well and looking at events and places where we can continue the conversation. Let's put it this way, right? Because I think that there is so much room to do that. We've explored a couple of ideas, not all of them worked out. But this year we went again at it slightly with a different approach and I think a slightly more successful one as well, where, you've been exploring this idea of not just attending events, but also like being, collaborating with it and doing more there. I think I mean, my takeaway from the Narrative Summit was that it was a really good, successful partnership. I mean, I'd love to get your thoughts also, but I think it was it felt like a very natural fit for what we're doing. And obviously, we've shared now, you moderated a panel while you were there. And so we've shared that. It was a lot, for me, that was a perfect intersection of a lot of the themes that have come up on the show, whether we talk about sort of the region and kind of how do we frame some of the narrative. And then, of course, we've had a good selection of arts and artists and sort of this idea of culture. So it was a very natural fit, but it's also great for us to have, and going back to your earlier point, it's great for us to have room to be able to share all of these things also, in addition to just having, multiple guest conversations in a month.
Yes, for me, the working with the Narrative Summit was a very natural fit. I met Lamia Kamil, the brains behind it, just very earlier this year. I was introduced to her by Amy Moefi, who is a friend of the show, and was also involved deeply with the Narrative Summit. We hit it off. It was just as simple as that. Navi and I hit it off. I was very impressed with what she was doing. I'm impressed by her as a person, a woman of great integrity, and a woman who gets things done, which, as a lot of us were saying, it's a women's world for getting things done. I think women are very good at that, multitasking, getting stuff done, promising something and then actually delivering it. Beyond our involvement in the Narrative Summit, I just want to highlight one other thing that she did, which I was very impressed about, the summit as a whole, which is after the event, her and her team reached out to all the partners involved, including some of the panelists, maybe all the panelists, but certainly my panelists. She reached out to people to ask their opinion on what went well and what did not go well at the
Right.
event. And, that's unheard of in Egypt, in our part of the world. Maybe it's more common in the UAE where there's a larger expat community. But here, this is not the norm. So the idea that they wanted to learn from their challenges to improve for next time. And so all of us wrote in what we thought worked very well and what we thought didn't work so well. And they took it all on board in exactly the spirit in which it was intended. So
Right.
I was really, really happy to hear that and to see that as an initiative. So that was one thing. The other thing that I think is in terms of a bigger picture and less about the process, is the fact that it was an event that was highlighting Egypt. It was highlighting Egypt in terms of tourism, in terms of placing it in a position to attract larger investment from abroad. And in that respect, I think it hit the mark because the panels were very well curated. They were quite broad, and they had people on the panels who were at the top of their games. For example, the panel I chaired was about culture and heritage and history. And that, of course, is important to know how to move forward in a society. You have to look back. There was a few very good panels on investment and what to do to create an investment environment that is going to grow the economy. And of course, we had there were panels that were much more focused on tourism. So on the whole, I think that these are important questions, and I think for us as a show, it matches how we think because I've spoken about this so many times that the show, with the fact that we've had now 5 years of guests and we've been around for quite a long time in the ecosystem, one of the byproducts of the show has been to promote a positive and what's the word? A positive outlook for our region.
Absolutely.
As I've said, it was a byproduct of the show, but in my mind now is really quite crucial and quite the cornerstone of the show. And wanting to promote our region in a positive light when we are surrounded by so much difficulty, and whether it's in our region or further away, difficulty, distrust, upheaval, turmoil. There's so much going on that's negative around us. That when we are able to showcase stories from individuals across different industries, that are positive and that are improving their industries and improving their sectors, I'm all for it. And the Narrative Summit is fundamentally about that, showcasing the best of Egypt, seeing the areas that need some adjustments and fixing, and trying to get that done. So I was so happy to partner with them. I think it's going to be an ongoing relationship.
Obviously, when we started, um, I think it was very, you had a lot of individuals who were creating and doing things in the region that are interesting. That's always been the case. But I think now you're starting to see a lot more momentum behind it. And so I think that's where all these partnerships are coming up, right? Because obviously, you know, they're not creating a podcast, right? It's not like podcasters finding each other, but I think there's so much synergy between an event like the Narrative Summit and then what we're trying to do within the space of the show. And we've seen that with other partnerships as well, right? With like things like Egypt Fashion Week that we've partnered with in the past. I think there's a lot of room where like-minded people, we don't have, like I said, we don't have to all be podcasters to try and find common ground, right? I think, or content creators. I think where we all have similar missions. There's so much room to come together, work together, and then do almost symbiotic partnerships that serve that purpose, but also help everyone.
Yeah.
So I think that those are very natural places we can go, and try and do more and more. And so even if someone's listening to this and you're working on something, I think there's always room for us to see how we can,
Yeah.
work together.
I agree. When we come back, Chirag and I pull back the curtain on what's coming up, including our next guest, so stay tuned. This episode is brought to you by EFG Hermes One, your one app for investment across more than 35 stock markets worldwide. With EFG Hermes One, you can buy and sell orders in real time for immediate execution across multiple global markets. You can keep track of your favorite stocks by creating and customizing multiple watch lists, and make informed investment decisions with their advanced technical analysis tools to study market trends and investor behavior. So supercharge your financial journey and download the EFG Hermes One app on the Apple App Store and on Google Play and start investing today. Welcome back to What I Did Next. You're listening to our check-in episode where we recap the last 6 months of the year. So one of the things I've really appreciated this year so far, Chirag, is the fact that each of our guests and our discussions has been so different from each other. In the past, when we've had our check-ins, you and I, we've always found threads connecting our interviews together or our guests together. There was one season in particular a few years ago where the question of identity was just so strong running through everything. This time round, there was nothing connecting any of these guests together. And I actually think that's kind of fun. So, we went from Farida Osman. We had obviously a very young lady who's at the top of her game for swimming. Her
And our first
experience,
athletes, by the way. Yeah.
exactly. Her experience is unique to her. I mean, I don't think there's anyone we've had on the show that's comparable. And then we, of course, had Khalid Abdallah, whose episode just went stratospheric on many different platforms. His experience, because he's such a strong activist as well, his story was quite unique. And then, I just want to highlight Omar Hilal because, his story was just so much fun. His story was just, a hoot, really.
One of the mangoes gets lost at sea, and the prop guy is swimming, trying to catch this mango, and I'm shouting. I'm literally pulling my hair out.
And then also Fatin. I mean, Fatin Mustafa is just such an intellectual. She's such a heavyweight. She's really, extremely respected in the art world beyond Egypt. I mean, she's regionally known. And we got messages and I think shares on that episode by Sultan Al Qasimi, who's one of our old alumni. And he's obviously a big fan and they're friends. And so he shared a couple of those posts.
We always say that sometimes, like you have these conversations sometimes where you just feel like they would not end, right? And it just keeps going and keep going.
Yeah.
It's really fun. I think that was the first time in the history of the show that you left an apology note to me during the recording.
Did I do that really? Last section, which I'm going to go into now, because we've really
Yes.
got a lot.
Your poor editor.
Yes, Chirag, I'm sorry. And in her case, she hasn't done a lot of media. I think it's her first podcast. And, it's like she'd been holding it all in, and she was just dying to let it out. But I also think the thing with Fetten for me, that it was a very natural conversation because our paths have really mirrored each other. And it was just like sitting
Yeah.
down with like someone you're meeting and you're discovering, oh my God, I did that too. Oh my God, me too. So it's got this very nice flow to it. So that was a lot of fun.
It's interesting, as we're reflecting on this, I think it's almost an outcome of the fact that we've changed the seasonal structure, because I think some of it was just natural alignment, right? Like these guests came together and they all happened to be around the same area. But a lot of it also because we were curating at a seasonal level, right? It's like who's the next eight?
Yeah.
Probably because of the way we were thinking about it, you were kind of gravitating towards a certain kind of thing, or and a lot of times, of course, it would be like, okay, I already have say X industry, Y industry, I need to go find, those are some of the conversations we've had when we've curated guests. Not to say that we're not curating them now, but I think that there's a little bit of a freedom that's come with this structure where it's like now we're not trying to be who's the next date, right? We're thinking of, okay, who do we want to get into the conversation? Let's slot them in as we can during the year. I mean, there are commonalities always. I mean, some of our themes do come up, right? So you look at things like where you talked about identity, you talked about contributing to the region. You'll see things like knowing what you wanted to do at an early age. I mean, these are all themes we've seen throughout the show, and they have existed. It's not like they're not there. But like you said, there isn't like a hard thread where suddenly it's like, oh, all of these people went through very similar pivots.
Yeah.
But that's also, I mean, it makes it fun. It makes it nice. Like you said, we've had an athlete and an actor and a curator and a director put together and create these amazing conversations for us.
Having said what you said about, we're trying to also maintain an equilibrium between industries. We don't want anything to be too art heavy or too business heavy. So we have a few nice coming, interesting industries coming up as well, which is fun.
Absolutely. One of the other nice things, of course, is that, our previous hiatuses these wrap-up episodes are used to end in, okay, we'll be back in September. Whereas this time we're like, well, stay tuned next week. There's a new episode.
Yeah, absolutely.
Which is fun. And again, we've got a new industry, and I think it's a super fun conversation.
Yeah. So I had the pleasure of meeting Farah Dibani, the opera singer, over the Christmas period in Cairo. And I immediately went to her and I said, I'd really love to have you on the show. I had already seen her in concert before that, and I was blown away by her talent. I mean,
Right.
she's just such a powerful voice. And so I knew I wanted to have her on, and she immediately said, yes, I'd love to. And it just took a while to get the logistics organized because she got married as well at the beginning of the year. So we were working around that. And then when we finally did have our conversation, it was she's just so open and so wonderful and such an interesting story, such a great ambassador for the country. Really does us proud. And she's a really, really interesting story as well. So that's coming up very soon.
Yeah, I can say that it is a great conversation. I also now know the difference between a mezzo soprano and a soprano. And if you want to know what that is, stay tuned for the episode.
I had to ask her that at the very beginning because I'm happy to be the ignorant one on behalf of my listeners. I have no embarrassment. I'm happy to ask those questions.
I think one of the things that and this has happened with previous guests also, it gives us an insight into sometimes an industry that maybe we don't have a direct understanding of. So it's actually Ayman Damar was a good example, right, where we looked in the world of medicine and what that means and how a company with such a long history kind of moves generations, and then for me it's like this is similar, right? We have had Fatima Saeed on the show, so we've kind of touched on that world, but it was that was 4 years ago. So it's nice to kind of look at a performer and how they put their work together and how they think
Absolutely.
about their work and kind of what that cycle looks like, because it's so different from, say, when you're in the world of business. Even when you're a
It's such a
chef, like
different world.
it's such a different world,
Completely.
right?
In a way, Fatma Saeed and Farah Debani and Fatma Osman have more in common because they treat their body like athletes and they have to seclude themselves, look after themselves, eat well, exercise. I mean, it's all the same actually in a way. So
Yeah.
there, in a way, there is those have common threads, you know.
So I like start like at 8 a.m. and I'm like home by 6 or 7. And this is like when my day actually starts, but by the time that comes, I'm
Yeah,
like dead. I
of
just want to
course.
sit on the couch
Of
and just like
course.
eat and like watch.
Of course, and not talk to anyone.
Yeah.
Leave me alone.
Literally.
I want to go back, Chirag, to the Ayman Tamr interview, because for me, yes, of course, looking at healthcare and understanding that sector in our region is really important because we have countries that have abominable healthcare. And in fact, it was one of the highlights of the Narrative Summit. One of the individual speakers, Sharif Al-Haqqi, he was a doctor, and he just stood there and he said, "I'm not here to give you platitudes. I'm here to tell you that the situation is dire." And he got a standing ovation. So health is critical as an industry that we need to address. And Ayman spoke about that very eloquently. But for me, one of the important features of that interview, and it's something I want to talk about because was the fact that it's a family run business. And our region of the world, Egypt, Saudi, UAE, have so many privately run, family run businesses. And they have their own sets of challenges and their own way of doing things.
We've had other family businesses on the show. We've had a couple of second generation ones on the show.
Yeah.
The Kami sisters come to mind, of course. And you spoke to them about that too, right? Like working with your sister, but also inheriting this business from your father. And how do you kind of navigate that? And they spoke a lot about those challenges of like
Yep.
not only their own, but also sort of the company looking at them being like, oh, they're in this position because X or Y, and you have to build that trust as
Yeah.
you sort of move generations.
Underneath the 20 people who were the right hand of my father and uncle, there was no successors. So my father was retiring with a group of 20 management retiring, and I saw the gap. And I realized that I cannot retain talent unless I change this.
I always think also about that person who inherited the business, whose heart is elsewhere. It's not the case with Ayman because he's very much involved in the business and he took it on board very willingly and took it even further. But I'm thinking of just, anonymous people who inherit a business, but they're not equipped and they're not interested in doing it, but they're saddled with it and they're good sons, they're good daughters, and so they carry it
Yeah,
on.
this line between like sort of responsibility and legacy versus
Exactly,
your
exactly,
passion, right? Like and
exactly.
finding that balance. Of course,
What if
yeah.
he could have been the next Picasso? He could have been the next whatever. She could have been the next opera singer, and that we'll never know because they're in a line of work that they feel obliged that they have to do. It's just one of the things that I always think about when I meet people who are running businesses that they've inherited, as opposed to thinking, oh, he's lucky, he doesn't have to think about what to do, or she's lucky. But in fact, it's not necessarily, the best position to be in, I find.
No, it's you're right. It's very interesting. It reminds me of a book I read quite a long time ago called Good to Great, which is this idea of like multi-generational businesses and how do they, it's companies like 3M, that have lasted hundreds
Yes.
of years, and
Yes.
how do they kind of not only pivot but innovate and transfer, and I think it's very hard to do that if, like you said, if your heart's not in it.
Exactly.
Which is also why that adage exists, right? Of this, by the third generation, things kind of go sometimes very far away from things. So
yeah.
Well, I think that brings us to the end of this. Sorry, check it. I keep wanting to say wrap up, but I mean check it. Episode.
Wrap up.
Yeah, exactly. We already touched on, but stay tuned for the Bannies episode coming shortly.
I hope everyone's enjoying the show so far. And remember, you can always reach us via email, on all the social medias. And so get in touch.
Thank you, right, to everybody who's listened, but also everybody who's commented. It's been a fun thing that we've been sharing a lot of comments
Yeah.
now recently as well, because it's been just really nice to kind of get
Yeah.
that feedback.
I also want to thank EFG Holding. They've been our long-term sponsor, and they're super encouraging, always looking forward to the next guest. And we'll be having as well a special episode with them in the second half of the year. So stay tuned for that.
This has been great. Excited to see where the next 6 months go.
Thanks, Chirag. That was really great. Nice to check in and just kind of reflect on what we've done so far this year.
Thank you, everybody, and thank you, Malak. And we'll see you again soon.
Thanks, Chirag.